This episode is brought to you by Sterling Soap Company. Fellas, you've heard the phrase, look good, feel good, right? But why not add smell good to that too? That's where Sterling Soap Company comes in. First, Sterling Soap is 100% natural and has a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne. Second, there's a scent just for you. How about burgundy? Yeah, it's more than a color. The Sterling Soap folks blend natural essential oils with hints of mahogany, golden amber, and sandalwood. Or how about D503, an intensely masculine scent inspired by Legend by Mont Blanc. And third, you will feel good about the price. For just a little more than you'd pay at the grocery store, Sterling Soap will leave you feeling clean, refreshed, and ready for whatever's next. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Darren Hayes, host of the Pigskin Dispatch and Jersey Dispatch podcast. I hope you've enjoyed another great episode here on Sports History Network. Now, speaking of sports history, this episode was brought to you by Firefly Books, and they have two great ones for you this summer. For basketball fans, they have the NBA 75, the definitive history by author Dave Zarum, who's appeared on our Jersey Dispatch podcast recently. He tells about the experience, the thrilling journey of the NBA, from its humble beginnings to its modern glory. Uncover the untold stories of triumph, controversy, and the greatest stars of the game. This isn't just a book, it's courtside seats to over 75 years of NBA history. And for the golf enthusiasts, swing into The Golf Round I'll Never Forget by Matt Adams. Relive 50 of golf's most memorable moments through the eyes of the legends themselves. From Garcia's triumph at the 2017 Masters to Nicklaus' miraculous 1986 comeback, it's the closest you'll get to walking the fairways with golf's greatest. Get your summer read on. Grab a copy of NBA 75 or The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, available online or at your favorite bookstore.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
When it comes to free agency, baseball and its reserve clause are the most discussed. From the days of Curt Flood and Andy Messersmith to Reggie Jackson, Alex Rodriguez, and now Juan Soto. But one of the first to challenge the reserve clause and lose was Danny Gardella. Who was Danny Gardella, and why don't we know more about him? Next on Sports Forgotten Heroes, you'll find out.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes episode number 155, Danny Gardella. So who was Danny Gardella? He has quite the interesting story. Is he a sports forgotten hero? Well, that depends on who you ask, and it depends on who remembers him. He did not have a long Major League Baseball career, but he did get off to a good start. In fact, in his first and only full season, Danny hit .272 for the New York Giants with 18 home runs, 71 RBI, and an OPS of .775. Certainly not superstar numbers, but he had a bright future ahead of him. However, he did not like the contract offer he was made after the 1945 season by the Giants, and he opted to challenge baseball's reserve clause. It cost him his career. He wound up playing in the Mexican League, bounced around in a couple of other leagues, but was basically blackballed. He finally got back to the majors with the St. Louis Cardinals in 1950, played one game, and that was it. His career was over. So was he a hero? Well, to the major league players who enjoy free agency today, whether they realize it or not, what Gardella did helped pave the road to the free agency stars in every sport enjoy today. On this episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes, we're going to talk about what Gardella did and free agency with the author of the book, Dangerous Danny Gardella, Robert Elias. Before we get there, please follow, rate, and review Sports Forgotten Heroes wherever it is you are listening. Follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on X at Sports F Heroes. Look for the Sports Forgotten Heroes page on Facebook. And if you have a suggestion for a forgotten hero you'd like to know more about, or have a comment about the show, please send me an email. Send it to sportsfh.info@gmail.com. That's sportsfh.info@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for your support. Okay, let's get into today's show with my guest, Robert Elias. Hey, Rob. Welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. So glad you can join this evening.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
You wrote a really interesting book about a baseball player by the name of Danny Gardella. And I want to start with something interesting. The book, Dangerous Danny Gardella. Tell us about the cover photo. What was he doing, and just how acrobatic was Danny Gardella?
He was very acrobatic, and along with a number of other things that surpassed what he did in baseball, either on the field or off the field. The photo was taken actually in Miami, and it was at a key moment because the photo was taken right before he was actually kicked off the Giants. This was at spring training, where the Giants were holding spring training in 1946. You look at that photo, that would be extremely hard for anyone else to do, but he was an acrobat, along with many other things, extremely physical fit. He would walk on his hands. Some say he walked on his hands faster than a lot of the Giants could run. And so that's where that photo comes from. And there are so many others of him performing acrobatic stunts.
Rob, you grew up in the New York area. Is that where your interest in Danny and Danny's story comes from? Where did you first learn about Danny? And where did your interest in him come from?
Yeah, well, certainly it has a New York angle as well, but it started actually from a couple of previous books that I did. The first one was The Empire Strikes Out, and I was looking at the baseball's relationship between U.S. Historic relationship with U.S. foreign and military policy, and in there I came across Gardella. Because there was an issue of intervention in Mexico, and Gardella's name popped up as associated with that. And I thought, well, no, that's interesting, but I didn't really take it much further. Then more recently, Peter Dreyer and I wrote two books, Baseball Rebels and Major League Rebels, and Gardella showed up again. Mm-hmm. And a little bit more directly, connected to my theme in this most recent book is the way he revolted and pushed back against the miserly salaries that he was receiving, and then engaged in his so-called Mexican Revolution. So it's really there. I also, coincidentally, my parents are almost exactly contemporaries of him. And Danny grew up in the Bronx. So did my mother. My father grew up in Queens. Later, Danny spent a lot of his working life after baseball in Queens. And really, I thought it would be some insight into my parents' lives. And then finally I got interested because I've always been fascinated with the post-World War II period. And it seemed like there were a lot of unfulfilled promises. And the more I explored it, the more I was kind of surprised to find there was an enormous amount of labor agitation in the broader society. And I began to think that maybe the labor resistance, the labor rebellion that Gardella and others engaged in that same period of time might have been somewhat of a reflection of that. So those are some of the things that got me going on this.
Mm-hmm. When you examine the career of Danny Gardella, there's really, as far as on the field, there's really nothing truly remarkable to review. I mean, he came up with the New York Giants, now the San Francisco Giants. In 1944, he hit .250 with 6 home runs and 14 RBI in 47 games. In 1945, his first full season with the Giants, he hit 272 with 18 home runs, 71 RBI. He had an OPS 775, not bad. OPS plus of 114, again, pretty good. And that was it. He was gone. He returned in 1950 for one game with the St. Louis Cardinals.
Exactly.
So what makes Danny Gardella such an important figure in baseball history?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is true. By comparative standards, his best season, 1945, was not a sensational season. But actually, he was among the leaders in a couple of categories that year, including home runs. And I think that's part of what provoked things here, is that he felt like he deserved a significant raise, and he didn't get that raise. And he began to think that, well, that wasn't very fair, and do I have any alternatives? And of course, generally speaking, the ball players didn't have alternatives. So to answer your question, it's a question of what he did then to remove himself from the major leagues that became a real threat to Major League Baseball. And so they responded to it. And this, of course, has to do with resisting the reserve clause in every player's contract, protesting that they were violating the antitrust laws and that ought to be taken to court. And so he coincidentally met a guy named Jorge Pascal, working at a gym. He was a masseuse and trainer at Al Roon's gym, which was an upscale gym in New York City. And he met this guy, Pascal, and it turned out that Pascal owned a team in the Mexican League and pretty much ran that league as well. And Pascal knew about Gardella. He was a big baseball fan in the U.S. or for U.S. baseball, and he couldn't believe how little Gardella was being paid. And he said, anytime you want to play for me, I'll pay you a lot more. Well, Danny never thought he'd have to take him up on it, but a couple of months later, he decided he was going to do that. Now, Pascal is interesting because he had been recruiting successfully Negro League players, black players from the U.S. who were still banned from the major leagues, and really building up the Mexican League already to be able to make some claims that, hey, we're getting to be a major league too. And that sort of set the table then for Gardella saying, well, if the Giants don't want me, then I'm just going to hop to this league and I'm going to bring some other people with me. And so I think that's the beginnings of it.
Yeah, we're going to get into a bunch of that. Before we do, I'd like for you to give me a little more background on Danny Gardella. Where he's from and his entree, his climb to get to the major leagues.
Yeah, sure. So Gardella was born in the Bronx. He grew up in Little Italy, part of the Bronx. His brother was also a ball player, Al Gardella. So they were pretty fixated on playing baseball. Played a lot of sandlot baseball, and then they played for some travel teams. And so they got pretty good. They got a bit of a reputation, and both of them were given contracts. Actually, Al started with the Yankees, but then he was traded to Detroit, and then at that point, Danny was also offered a contract. So they both were playing on minor league teams in the Detroit Tigers system beginning in 1938, and then he got traded into the Cleveland Indians organization. Then he got traded into the Washington Senators organization. So he was sort of kicking around in the minors for 3 years, from 1938 to 1940. And he had some level of success, but really didn't feel like he was going to make it. And he decided that, maybe this wasn't for me after all. And he quit baseball. And he went, worked a series of blue-collar jobs, including in the shipbuilding industry. And there he was spotted by a guy named Joe Birmingham. And Joe Birmingham was a Cleveland Indians player. He also managed Cleveland. And he thought Gardella had a lot of potential. And he was doing some scouting for both the Yankees and the Giants. And he mentioned it to Mel Ott. Mel Ott sent a scout out. The scouts watching the game, and Gardella hit 3 home runs in that game. And he said, okay, we'll sign you. We'll give you a shot. And so instead of, kicking around in lower level minor leagues, he signed to a contract in the AAA Jersey City club, one step from making it to the major leagues in 1944. So that's how he got into that position.
I think the story of Danny Gardella is really about the reserve clause, right? Can you tell us how it differed back during his playing days as opposed to the way it is today? Baseball play, there was no such thing as free agency. You were owned by a team. Although, I think a lot of players signed 1-year contracts and renewed, but you were still really property of one team. There wasn't movement like there is today. How was baseball structured back then as far as player movement is concerned, the reserve clause, as opposed to the way it is today?
Yeah, sure. Well, this started back in the 1880s, and so by the 1940s, it had been going on for decades, and then it continued for another couple of decades after that. So everyone essentially got a 1-year contract, and the contracts were common. They were uniform contracts. In other words, all of the teams collaborated with each other to impose the same exact contract. And in the contract, if you signed it, you played for that team for that year, but you were reserved for the following year, right? So all of the power of this was in the hands of the owners rather than the players, because they could drop you with 10 days notice and cancel the contract, whereas you were obliged to play for the next for the next season with them unless they dropped you, or unless they traded or sold you to another team, in which case you would be reserved to that team. So this was the dilemma. You were bound to the team, so there was a kind of, indentured servitude feeling of it, but maybe as important, it suppressed wages because you couldn't put your skills and your experience out on the open market and say, well, who's going to be the highest bidder for my services? You couldn't do that because all the teams collaborated and colluded to prevent that from happening. So that was really the contract aspect of this. Now, there's also a part of this that has to do with antitrust. So antitrust laws were passed as far back as 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act. And the idea was to try to generate competition in industries where there was no competition, to try to get the benefits of competition. And the problem is that those laws were not very well enforced generally. And then on top of that,
when it came to sports, baseball.
Say it again?
Especially when it came to baseball.
Yes, and as I was going to say, in 1922, a specific decision about the baseball industry said that baseball was exempt from the antitrust laws. Now, one of the things, if it hadn't been exempt, was antitrust laws forbid collusion. They forbid companies getting together and arranging things so that they set higher prices or they set lower wages. And that's really exactly what the owners were doing in the baseball industry, but they were exempt from that. So this is what the players were faced with. And occasionally they'd push back against it. And the only real relief they got from this is if another major league emerged. And that did happen a few times, right? Because they want to be major leaguers, right? But they would have to have another league to play for. So, for example, in 1882, the American Association emerged to challenge the National League. 1890, the Players League emerged to challenge the National League and the American Association. 1901, the American League emerged to challenge the National League. And then the National League and the American League were challenged by the Federal League in 1914. But in every instance, it was very short-lived. So it would last for a year or two. They would be free from the reserve clause for that period of time. Their salaries would go up, but then the leagues would collaborate with each other, and they would be back to the reserve clause and back to slashing their salaries and their mobility. And so that's what the players were faced in the late 1940s when Gardella came along.
What prompted Danny to challenge Major League Baseball's reserve clause, and what were the main arguments in his lawsuit? Not everybody. There were players that were fine with the system, and then there was players like Danny who weren't. So why did he challenge the system?
Yeah, it was a very bold thing to do, especially because you could imagine, of course, the owners are going to be against you. But when he discovered that a lot of players were also against him, and there was a real sort of timidity, later on, Marvin Miller, when he became head of the baseball union, he was astounded to hear the attitudes of ball players not realizing the value they were creating for the owners and not stepping up to sort of get a better piece of the pie. And I think that's what Danny encountered oftentimes too with his fellow players. But Danny was a very unique individual, and he was someone, I think, who was just sort of rebellious at heart. And when he felt like he was not being treated well, he responded to it. And he didn't really care what other people thought. And I think it was a personality aspect was very important in this case. And also, the coincidence of meeting a guy who gave him an out, right? So here's another major league coming along. Here's the Mexican League. Well, I can play for them. I've just been invited to play for them. So let's take a shot.
Well, what surprises me the most about this is Danny wasn't a grizzled veteran. Danny wasn't hadn't been in the majors for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Danny played 40-something games his first year, played a full season his second year. Actually, it was like he played, I think, 120 of the 154 games. And then he challenges the clause. It's like, who is Danny Gardella at this point in his career to do this?
Yeah, that's what the owners were thinking too. Who the hell is this guy? Yeah, I think it's if you were to try to have predicted it, you probably wouldn't. Who is this guy? But he just was that kind of person, was sort of in the right place at the right time, where his personality pushed him, and he had then an opportunity to try to do something about it. And if the Mexican League didn't come along, if he had never met Jorge Pascal, then maybe he would have been, despite his personality, would have been limited in his options.
Sure. So basically, he wants a raise from the Giants. He doesn't like the amount of money they've settled on to pay him for the 1946 season. So take us into a little bit about that. I'll call it failed negotiation, and ultimately Danny leaving the team. Take us into that episode.
Yeah. Well, Gardella had a very good season in 1945, but he had a lot of idiosyncrasies. And I think his idiosyncrasies would have been more prominent had he not had such a good season. And Mel Ott, the manager, tolerated, you could say, a lot of his hijinks, let's say. And so there was a bit of a tension, especially near the end of the season. And Ott said, Gardella's going to be with me for the following season, but you never quite knew what the relationship was going to be. Then you've got players coming back from the war, right? So the Giants have more options now as to who's going to play on the team, right? So they begin to develop an attitude, I think, and they weren't alone. I don't mean to just blame the Giants, but this notion that, we don't necessarily have to deal with some of these guys that we've been playing previously during the war, because we've got this new, not new, but sometimes new, but returning players who had played for us before. And so we're not going to take any shenanigans. And I think that's part of what Danny was caught up in. So it turns out he missed the train going from New York down to Miami. And he claimed that he was purposely given the wrong information about the train. Now, it's not clear whether that's true or not, but this might have been one indication that he might have been dispensable as far as the Giants were concerned. He gets down there, and it turns out that they're essentially applying double standards, because there were actually other players who had not signed their contract. But Danny was sort of singled out and told, you can't get into the team hotel, and you can't get onto the field. Now Ott changed his mind briefly about the second one, and then he goes to collect his fee to get reimbursed for the train ticket, which he had to pay for himself. And he walks into this dining room, and he has this interaction with Brannick, who is the team secretary, and it goes very badly. And he didn't dress up. So everyone else has a shirt and tie on, apparently, and a jacket. And Brannick lays into him in front of everyone else. And so immediately you have this sort of conflict situation. So there's raw relations on both sides here. And then things sort of spiraled downward. And Ott just decided, I'm not alone. I mean, Stoneham, Horace Stoneham also was a part of this, said, maybe we don't need Gardella, and, maybe we'll sell him to some minor league team. And so it just sort of was a downward spiral. And so Gardella, thought, well, maybe I ought to take the high road on this. And he said, well, I'll sign for the amount that you offered me. Take the amount, even though I think it's less than what I deserve. And they said, no, we're not interested anymore. And then, Mexico was the option, and that's what he did.
That's crazy to think. I mean, he had he had a good 1945 season, but like you said, the Giants had other options. He got into this battle with the Giants, and he lost. He lost the battle. Even after he said, I'll fall in line, I'll do what you want. Nah, you know what? You're not for us anymore. So like you said, at the time, there was a new major league in its infancy, the Mexican League. And said that Danny met one of the owners of the team, someone who was amongst those forming this league. Tell us a little bit more about the Mexican League. Why was it started, and who else? Who are some of the other ball players who threatened to or left the major leagues to play in Mexico? I mean, I remember I did a show about Sal Magli. He was one of the ones who went down to Mexico.
Right. So the Mexican League had been around for a while. It wasn't new. And as I was suggesting earlier, aside from the players who had been recruited for a number of years from all of the sort of Caribbean nations, there were a lot of Cubans, for example, who were playing in addition to the Mexicans who were playing in that league. Pascal had been very successfully recruiting black players from the Negro leagues, and that was a large part of his claim that look, we're playing a close to at least a major league brand of baseball here. And so his idea was, hey, there's a bunch of white players who I haven't recruited yet, who are typically underpaid, and I can pay them a lot more. And maybe now's the time to try to recruit white players instead of just the black players. So again, it was a kind of coincidental timing issue as well. So he thought, look, I can get the white players in here in addition to all the black players I've had playing and others from the Caribbean. I'm going to have myself a pretty formidable league here. And, later he started complaining. He said, how can you have a World Series when you've only got one country's teams involved? You ought to play our league, and then we'll talk about World Series. So, Pascal was able to recruit, Gardella and as you say, Sal Magli, and he recruited Mickey Owen, and a number of the other giants were there. Ace Adams eventually went to the team. Lou Klein, Max Lanier. Also from the Cardinals, and Lanier's interesting story too, because he had been playing and had been starring for the Cardinals, so he was not in the same category as someone like Gardella, and in fact he had started that season 6-0 for the Cardinals, and he was so dissatisfied that he decided to jump as well. So there were a number of everyday players, but there were a few sort of close stars. And then Pascal began going after the big shots. He started to recruit Ted Williams and Stan Musial and Phil Rizzuto, and a couple of them came very close. Probably Musial came the closest to actually signing. So it was his attempt to sort of build up his league, and to use the white players to, in a sense, give it more white U.S. players, give it more legitimacy. And then, of course, he didn't plan it for it to go only 1 or 2 years. He was planning on doing this over a period of time, and it didn't work out that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't sustainable. But the players that left Major League Baseball and went to Mexico were facing a ban. Now, some of them were let back in and others weren't. Can you talk about the ban, the philosophy behind the ban, why some players were let back in and why others weren't?
Okay, so the philosophy behind the ban is that these jumpers challenge the baseball's business model, basically, right? If you could have another league that players could jump to for more money and to be freed from the reserve clause, that would be awfully inviting and challenge the way in which Major League Baseball was running the business. So it had to, from its point of view, it had to do something to try to deter this behavior. Right. So the ban was a warning to anyone else who might think about doing this. And then it was punishment for those who had actually jumped. And there were about 25 players who jumped. And so it was a 5-year ban. And that's not forever, but in the life of a baseball player, that's forever.
That's a long time.
That's a long time. So if you wanted to come back and you had to wait for a full 5 years, it's likely you would not be signed by anyone. Your baseball talents would have dissipated, and it would have been very difficult for you to continue your career. Okay, so for the band players who did try to come back, when Gardella filed suit, claiming that he was being deprived of his living playing baseball, Albert Chandler, the commissioner, decided that he was going to keep the ban going, even though some of the owners were saying, that's not a good idea, rescind the ban. The worst of this is over. Don't keep this punishment in effect here, because that's only going to fuel this lawsuit and make things worse. And actually, Chandler got into a lot of conflict over this, and was one of the reasons why he was basically let go sooner than he might otherwise have been. So, in the end, The ban was eventually dropped, and it was dropped earlier. I think it was after 3 years. Not as early as some of the owners wanted, but it was dropped after 3 years. And some of the players went back, and a few did not go back. Some never came back from the Mexican League. They just kept playing down there. There were others like Danny and Sal Magli and Max Lanier who were playing up in Canada in the Quebec Provincial League. And Lanier eventually went back to the Cardinals, but Magli and Gardella stuck it out, and actually they won the championship that year in the Quebec Provincial League. The big problem is that a number of the people who were banned, especially Mickey Owen, who sort of was leading a crusade here, was trying to pressure Gardella to drop his suit, because they thought as soon as he drops his suit, then Chandler's going to drop the ban, and then they'll all be able to come back again. And they were never successful in convincing Gardella to do that, and they had to wait until Chandler was good and ready to do that.
Was Gardella banned?
He was banned, yeah.
So the reason I ask, you're right, he was. Yeah, of course he was. But what I found interesting was he really had no place else to go play, because the Giants said, we don't want you anymore. But he sort of wasn't free to go join another team. So really his only option was to go play in Mexico, and yet he was still banned. Is that not correct?
Well, all of the people who were banned, and not only from the team that they were on in the major leagues, but any other major league team and any other minor league team in the Major League Baseball system, and also any semi-pro team that was playing in the United States.
But my question is, the Giants said, we don't want you anymore. So what were his options?
Well, if there wasn't a ban, he could have tried to get on with another major league team, but it was just a matter of
before he went to so the Giants said, we don't want you anymore. So when the Giants said, we don't want you anymore, they booted him out of camp. That's when he made the decision to go to the Mexican League. But could he, instead of going to the Mexican League, could he have gone to another team in the majors had they wanted to sign him?
Yes, he could have.
Okay, I missed that point.
Yes, so he could have gone, first of all, to a minor league team, even that the Giants sold him to. And there were, the Milwaukee minor league team and the Minneapolis minor league team were the two main teams they were thinking of. Or he could have gone to another major league team as well. One of the differences that Gardella had was that he never signed the contract, whereas a number of the other jumpers did sign a contract. So he technically wasn't violating the reserve clause, whereas they were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When he got to Mexico, how did he do?
Well, it's interesting. He had a good start. That overall, he and the team didn't do that great. They were near the bottom of, it wasn't
like
a big league.
Veracruz or something like that,
yeah,
right?
Veracruz Blues, yeah. They didn't do that great. But one of the interesting things is that he switched to playing first base. And he was excellent there. And from the Mexicans' point of view, he was a star. He was great. I mean, he was on the cover of the Mexican baseball magazines. He was in the newspapers all the time. So he had a decent season, but it wasn't great. He was invited to sign again. He decided, that he didn't want to, even though, comparatively speaking, he had a great time in Mexico. He was able to adapt to the language. He liked the food. He liked the customs. He liked the people. He had a good experience, and maybe a little bit better than some of the other players who, they were reluctant to sort of get out there because they didn't know Spanish and they didn't feel, as comfortable in the culture.
So while he's down there, he's got this, he's challenging Major League Baseball. He's not dropping the suit. Tell us about the suit, because I think it was dismissed but then reinstated through appeals, and he ultimately, I don't know if he won, but he settled, did he not?
Well, yeah, he didn't sue while he was in Mexico. He sued after he came back to the U.S., and he started to play semi-pro ball. He was also a part of a long barnstorming tour that Max Lanier had organized. And all of the band players were looking at least for some way of making a little bit of money to see what would happen. Maybe the ban would be rescinded before the 5 years. And it was when Gardella was playing for a Staten Island semi-pro team that Chandler really began lowering the boom, because he was saying, it's not just that Danny Gardella is banned, but if there's anybody who's playing with Gardella or against Gardella, you will be potentially banned as well. So this all came to a head in a game that the Staten Island team was playing against the Cleveland Buckeyes, which was a Negro League team. In fact, they had just won the Negro American League Championship. It was like a prep for the Negro League World Series, and the Staten Island team was told to announce on behalf of the commissioner, Chandler, that anyone who played against Danny Gardella that day or with Danny Gardella that day would potentially be banned from Major League Baseball. So now this is at a time after Robinson breaks the color barrier. You've got players who are on one of the top teams in the Negro Leagues, players who thought, hey, maybe I'll be next to be able to break into the major leagues. So Gardella was sensitive about this, and he decided, look, I'm not going to play. I'm not going to jeopardize anyone's career. But basically, they're saying, look, you can't play in the majors. You can't play in the minors. You can't even play for the Staten Island team as a semi-pro. And he said, okay, I'm done. I'm suing. This is crazy.
And he did sue, and that's where there was a settlement, was there not? Didn't he win some money, like $60,000 or something?
Yeah. So in the end, there was a settlement, because what happened is that his case was, he initially lost the case, and then it was appealed to an appellate court, and it came before two very esteemed jurists, a guy named Jerome Frank on the one hand and Leonard Hand on the other. Now, these are two of the most esteemed appellate court judges in U.S. history, and they condemned the reserve clause in this decision. So, here's this vindication, really, and they said, okay, well, so we think that this is inappropriate, and so we're going to send this case back to a new trial, right? And so he was given a new trial, and that's when Major League Baseball got really nervous, and they said, okay, well, we don't want a trial, because if this is confirmed in the trial, then we're in deep trouble. So they started offering Gardella money. Yeah. So, yeah, the settlement was $60,000. He got half of it. 30,000, because actually 29,000 he had to pay off someone else, but his lawyer got the other half. So yeah, so $30,000, and he was in a difficult position, because he had very few resources, he had very few prospects. He knew that he was likely going to be blacklisted again, even if he was signed back into the major leagues, and I think the evidence suggests that is what happened. He was dropped almost immediately from the Cardinals.
Yeah, how did he wind up with the Cardinals? And after one game, bye-bye.
Yeah. Well, it seems that it wasn't the commissioner who arranged this deal, but actually the owner of the St. Louis Cardinals, Fred Say. And so it appears that Say said, look, as a part of this deal, I'll agree as one of the owners to take Danny back. And I'm not going to talk about, what his prospects are. are going to make it seem like he can, he can make it if he's good enough. And so that was the deal. So he got his settlement. He got a contract with the Cardinals. Things looked fairly good in spring training. He was on the opening day roster, but several games went by, and then finally he was put in as a pinch hitter. He got one at bat, and the next day he was sent down. And he wasn't just sent down to AAA, he was sent down to AA in Houston. And then things just sort of devolved from that, and he was released again, and the Cardinals said, well, there's no other team who's interested in you. And it was really kind of hard to believe that that was the case. But so that's why he thought he was blacklisted a second time.
On the surface, when you read everything, I don't, in the public eye, I don't think he regrets what he did, but do you think privately he did? I mean, he lost his major league career. Was all this worth it to him?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think on the one hand, he began to realize the implications of what he was doing, not just for himself, but for other ball players. And I think he was proud of that, proud of the impact that he might have had for future attempts to try to push back against this, what he viewed as an exploitative system. So from that point of view, I think you could say he thought it was worth it. But certainly, if he had any potential to keep going in Major League Baseball, it was cut short by this. He sacrificed. But who knows whether he could have or not? I mean, he did have some really, really good skills, and he might have been able to catch on with another team where there were there were intentions like he had with the Giants, and maybe he could have stuck around for a while. But it's just so sort of speculation. So if you said that, well, he didn't have any potential anyway, then maybe this was exactly the right decision. If he had some potential, then maybe he cut it short by doing this.
Mm-hmm. In reality, we think of Curt Flood and Andy Messersmith, right, as the guys who opened the doors to free agency. But really, this foundation was set in a large part due to Danny Gardella. How did Gardella's battle influence guys like Flood and Messersmith and others who also challenged the reserve clause?
Right. So the decision of the appellate court that I mentioned earlier, the Gardella versus Chandler case, was used in probably 24 cases after this. So from 1950 to the end of the 1960s. And it was used in challenges that were brought by other ball players, but also challenges that were brought against the same kind of reserve clause issue in other sports, the National Hockey League, the National Football League, and in other industries like the horse racing industry. There was a case where the Gardella case was used as a precedent. In the dog show industry, the Gardella case was used. So there doesn't seem to be any other challenge between 1950 and the end of the 1960s to a reserve clause and antitrust issue for a sports industry that did not invoke the Gardella versus Chandler case. So it became a way of sort of chipping away without getting the whole victory. And then the same happened in the Flood case. That was the main argument in his brief to the Supreme Court is hey, look what they said in the federal appeals court here. Look what Frank said to condemn the reserve clause. Now he did end up losing that, but the importance of the Flood case was that it really raised the consciousness of ball players in a way that had never been raised before. This is something, of course, that Gardella would have wished for in his time. And so I think there was much more of a sentiment. Okay, so we didn't win this case, the flood case, but we're gonna achieve this by some other means. And of course, Marvin Miller was very important in having set up already a grievance process and an arbitration process. And a few years later, then of course Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally, and they win the arbitration, and the reserve clause is basically null and void, and then you've got free agency.
So in a way, Gardella paved the way for all of this to happen. Others benefited from it, but Danny really didn't benefit from it. He lost his career because of it.
That's true. Yeah. So, players, of course, have enjoyed enormous riches, and actually the owners have too. In the meantime, and yet Danny, he enjoyed none of those riches, and so, he was sometimes acknowledged for his contribution to this along the way. But the reason I wrote the book is because I thought overall his story was neglected, and his role in this was neglected. And of course, the other reason is that there's so many other aspects of him, of his life and his talents, that he was such a character that I just think he's a fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good book, Dangerous Danny Gardella. It's not just about the reserve clause. There's so much more to it. When you take a look at the style of baseball player he was, we've really, the focus of today's show is what made, the importance of Danny Gardella in the history of baseball. But tell us about the kind of player he was. You sort of did before. Who would you compare Danny Gardella to in today's game? What kind of ball player was Danny Gardella?
Well, he was a very scrappy kind of player. He was someone who was extremely strong, even though he was quite small, and of course he had to live under people constantly referring to the fact that he was 5'6" or 7", weighed 150 to 160 pounds, but he did weight training at a time when that was rejected by ball players and by owners. That was something that would bulk you up, and it wouldn't be productive for you as a ball player. I mean, just trying to think of maybe Altuve, Jose Altuve, right? A small guy, but somehow he can pop the ball, and that was Danny. Just surprising power, and so I think his athleticism. And his enthusiasm for the game, and it came across with. I mean, he immediately built up a fan base, right? There was a Danny Gardella fan club almost immediately. There was a Gardella's Garden that was set up in the bleachers and in left field at the Polo Grounds. The first fan banners ever at the Polo Grounds were for Danny Gardella. And he would do his acrobatic stunts out there. He would talk to the crowd. He was just very engaged, a very engaging personality.
What did his contemporaries think about him?
They admired his skills. They thought he was a screwball. When he was sent down in 1944, when he cooled off, he had a nice beginning in 1940. He cooled off, and he was sent back to Jersey City. The consensus among the Giants players were, well, we understand why he was sent down. Danny's not hitting as well as he was, but this whole clubhouse is dead now. There's nothing going on. He was the life of the clubhouse. So from the point of view of lightening up the environment, making it fun, making it interesting, he was the guy. He was the guy.
How are we supposed to remember Danny Gardella, and why is it important that we do?
Well, I like to put it as there are people who have an impact who are not sort of in the room when it happens, right? They started something before, and something good happens later, right? Martin Luther King said that he could never have done whatever he did if it hadn't been for Jackie Robinson and the resistance he did a number of years later, right? So do you give Robinson any credit for helping with the civil rights movement? Well, I think you have to, right? So, I mean, that's my orientation here, is that Gardella was not in the room when it happened. And what I mean by that is he wasn't there when free agency was literally established, but he did pave the way, to use your terms. He set the foundation, and he started the players thinking and pushing back. And then they started filing the lawsuits, and then they got a real union together, and then it happened. So I think that's his legacy. He wasn't around at the time, and he was, I think, unfairly neglected in all of this. And but I think he had an impact.
Wow, Rob, so much. Really good book. Dangerous, Danny Gardella. I enjoyed it. I encourage everybody watching, listening to pick up a copy. And I just want to thank you for spending some time with us today.
Well, I appreciate it. This has been fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Danny Gardella took a huge risk. He sacrificed his entire baseball career for taking a stand and fighting for what he believed in. Today's big leaguers benefit partly based on what Gardella did. Now, was it worth it? Did he regret it? On the surface, it certainly doesn't appear that way. But in private, you gotta wonder. Thanks again to my guest today, Robert Elias, and thanks to all of you for listening, and I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
The heel gets the heat. The babyface gets the cheers. But the jobber gets, well, the job done. And speaking of jobbers, Barry Horowitz wasn't there to win titles. He was there to build them. By selling every move, every storyline, and every new star that stepped into the ring. He was the secret sauce. And now, he's the headline in his new book titled Wrestling is My Gimmick, My Life on the Wrong Side of the Three Count. This memoir is a deep dive into wrestling's most underrated position and the man who made it an art form. Whether you're a fan of wrestling, a fan of sports history, or just love a great story, this book is for you. Again, that's Wrestling is My Gimmick by Barry Horowitz. Grab your copy today before the count strikes 3.